My name is Robin Lee. Welcome to Buzz on the Bluffs, Vicksburg, Mississippi's Community Insights program. We're going to be looking at people, places, and events which impact our community. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining me today. My guest is Dan Fordice from the Southern Heritage Air Foundation. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
I've been out to the hangar a few times, and
Well, good.
It's always so interesting to me. I come to the luncheons, and I'm coming out for the air show. We'll talk about that later. Tell me how you got started with this.
Well, I've been interviewing World War II pilots for 15 years or so. And as I started interviewing these gentlemen, you know, they invited me into their house and all, and they always had a lot of memorabilia, uniforms, their medals, papers, different things. They would always bring those out and show me. And then a certain gentleman, well, I'm gonna say his name because the story sounds a little disparaging, but it really isn't. Nat Hovius from Vicksburg had a brother named Fred who was killed in the war. And I used to go to Nat's house and visit with him after his wife died. He was a bit lonely, and I spent a lot of time over there just visiting with him, and we just talked for hours. And his daughter called me one day and said, "We're moving Dad into a nursing home. Do you want to come over to the house and get all this stuff, or should I throw it away?" And I said, "No, don't throw anything away. I'm on my way over there." So that's the first display in the hangar, and we show that, and not at all to disparage her. The story is that that's happening 1,000 times a day across America. Dad dies, grandfather dies, and the kids go out in the garage or in the closet, and there's a big box with uniforms and papers and medals, and a lot of times they didn't really listen to all the old stories he was telling and all of that. And now what do I do with this stuff? So what we want to do is design a place that it could be thrown away rather than throwing it away at Waste Management. Mm-hmm. And so it's been quite amazing, actually. And I knew it was going to be this way. I call it kind of an if we build it, they will come type thing. And hardly a week goes by anymore when somebody doesn't come in there with something. Some of it's quite small, some of it's quite big, and says, you know, Dad died, Grandpa died, and we want y'all to have this. Mm-hmm. Better for it to be out on display where everybody can see it than locked away in a closet, or worse yet, thrown away for Waste Management to haul it off. One story along those lines is Joan Buglewitz was the school nurse at St. Al for a long time, and she came over and took a tour of the museum, and she said, "My dad was in the Battle of the Bulge, and I've got the big obligatory box in my closet somewhere. I've moved it, 4 times. I don't know what to do with it." She said, "I'd like to donate it over here." Got his uniform and some paperwork and all, and we said, that'd be great. So she brought it over. Patty set it all up on a display, and the next time I was at the hangar, Patty brought me over and showed it to me. And she said, "Look what I have down here. It's a meal ticket from when he got his ride home on the USS Enterprise." And I said, "Patty, that doesn't make any sense. The USS Enterprise was our main aircraft carrier in the Pacific. The Pacific War was still going on after the war in Europe was over." I said, "That makes no sense." And she said, "Well, there it is right there. You're looking at it." And she said, "Also, I've got a brochure here. They had a fancy dining in meal on the ride back to the United States. And they printed up the brochure with the menu on it and all of that." And I said, "That makes absolutely no sense." So I called down to the World War II Museum in New Orleans. I do a lot of work with them down there. So I called them and I said, "Guys, listen at what I have here." And they said, "That makes absolutely no sense." I said, "Thank you very much. I know that. That's why I'm calling the World War II Museum." And they got to researching it, and they said, "Look at this. It was called Operation Magic Carpet. And when the Enterprise was through in the Pacific, they swung by Europe and picked up 12,000 troops and took them home." We were 13 months after the war getting everybody home. But the World War II Museum had no idea that the USS Enterprise had come by Europe and picked up 12,000 troops. So because that box came out of the closet, The World War II Museum, the foremost expert on all of this, discovered something that they didn't know beforehand. Now, I couldn't resist the opportunity to tell them that if they needed to know anything in the future about World War II, they could just give us a call and we'd let them know. But, you know, that's a great example of there's boxes in closets and garages all over America, and 1,000 times a day, another box is added to that collection. So we wanted to build a place where people could bring that and put it on display. So, like you said, it is changing because we are now getting enough material that we can change it around. For the longest time, we had empty cases and we really didn't have enough, but now we're having a storage issue, which is a wonderful problem to have. And again, like I said, there's rarely a week that goes by when somebody doesn't bring something over there. And so, you know, I'd like to welcome everybody too. We'd love to put Dad's or Grandpa's memorabilia, uniforms, materials on display.
Or their mother. I have a friend whose mother was actually in the Marines.
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, that would certainly be interesting.
Everybody
there
served
weren't that
back
many
then.
Women, you know.
And we're mainly concentrating on World War II. We've got more than we can say grace over with World War II, so that's really where we're concentrating. But there were 16.5 million Americans in uniform during that time. Today, crowding 90% of them are gone, and the rest of them that are still here are leaving at a pretty alarming rate. And so we just don't want to see this stuff go to waste management.
Talk a little bit about the planes, because that's certainly, when you walk into the hangar, that's the most visible.
Well, we've got 3 historically significant airplanes and a couple of other just fun airplanes. I'll speak about fun airplanes first.
Okay.
We've got a Waco, a 1934 model. It was actually built in 95, but it's a 1934 model Waco open cockpit biplane that we sell rides in. And we've also got a Husky on floats, which is a little 2-place airplane on floats that we can land in the river with. Those are a lot of fun, and we've got. Now
that plane was your dad's, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I was looking at that when I was at the luncheon last month, and wasn't that converted? Weren't the floats added later?
We put the floats on there.
Okay.
He always talked about it, and he never did it. So once we got the airplane, we did. He wrote his name on the side of the airplane, so we couldn't get rid of it. So. Yeah. And he always talked about putting floats on it, so we went ahead and did it after we got the airplane. And it's a lot of fun. So we've got an FAA-approved rides program for everything in the hangar, unfortunately, except the airplane that everybody wants to ride in. That's the P-51
right.
Mustang. The FAA they've got a moratorium on the rides program right now. We're hoping, we keep hearing rumor that they're going to reinstate all of that shortly, and we'll be able to get the Mustang in there too, but today we don't have it in there. But as far as other historically significant airplanes, we've got 3 from the World War II era. We've got a 1942 T-6 Texan. It was called the Pilot Maker. All the pilots, no matter what they flew, the bombers, the fighters, every pilot had to go through the Pilot Maker. And it was really designed to wash them out. And it did a good job. You know, back in the day, we were so woefully unprepared for a global conflict at the end of 1941. And we woke up on December the 8th and we needed about 1 million of everything. And so it takes a long time to train a pilot to be able to effectively fight in combat. And so we started immediately, and they didn't have time to work with these guys a lot. They either picked it up very quickly or they washed them out and sent them to another program somewhere. And the T-6 was the aircraft responsible for doing that. And when you interview these the old pilots, they've all got a soft spot in their heart for the T-6. And they'll all tell you, I never ground looped the T-6. Ground looping in a tail dragger is when the little wheel comes around first and the aircraft spins around and it can do damage to it. It gets up on the wing. And if you did ever do that, you washed out of the program and you went somewhere else. So they all very proudly said, I never ground looped the T-6 because they saw a lot of people do that. It's a I don't want to say really a difficult airplane to fly, but it's challenging, and it's a lot of fun, and they all recognize it. And so then we also have a Twin Beach. Ours is a 1948 model, but the ones during the war didn't change. They made them from 39 to 69, I think, actually. And during the war, the Twin Beach, it's a Beach 18, had many functions. They taught multi-engine pilots in it. They had navigator trainers, bombardier trainers. They had VIP haulers. They had cargo versions. They used a lot of Twin Beaches during the war. They had, and all of them had a different designation, a different military number, depending on what they were doing. Ours was actually built just very shortly after the war. And then we have kind of the pride of our fleet is a P-51 Mustang. And by all accounts, almost all historians will tell you that that's the piece of equipment that won the war for the United States. It allowed us to escort the bombers all the way to Berlin. And before that, mainly the P-47s is what was guarding the bombers, and they just didn't have the fuel range. So they would fly them halfway, and they had to turn around and come back. And the Luftwaffe knew exactly where the fuel shortage was, and that's where they waited, and they just pounced on them right then. But when we could guard them all the way in, then really the only thing that they had to attack was the flak, which was pretty deadly too. But we could ward off the fighters. So at that point, we really started making a difference in the war when we got the airplane there. In fact, Hermann Göring, when he first saw a P-51 overhead Berlin, he said, we're done. If they can get that thing all the way to Berlin, we cannot win this war. But of course, they fought on for another 3 years. Our P-51 is painted like Carrie Salter's airplane. It's not the actual airplane. I get asked that question a lot. Almost none of the Mustangs flying today, there's a little over 100 flying in America today, and almost none of them have combat experience because we had them scattered out all over the world, and at the end of the World War in 1945, they were antiquated equipment because jets had just come out. And we did actually use them a little bit in Korea, not a lot, but we did use them a little bit in Korea. And then almost all of them that you see flying today were built late in the war. Ours was built July the 17th of 45, so it was still sitting on the factory floor when the war was over. And so, but we painted it up like Carrie Salter's airplane. Carrie was one of the first pilots, World War II pilots that I ever interviewed, and loved his story and loved him, and told him when we interviewed him 15 years ago that our dream was to someday own a Mustang, and if we did, we wanted to name it after his. And I got to tell you the story. We were out in Los Angeles looking at a Mustang to buy. We ended up not buying that one. We bought another one, but we called Kerry while we were out there in Los Angeles and told him what we were doing. And I said, you know, Kerry, we're going to make this, we're going to be able to do get the Mustang thing together, and we really want to name it Charlotte's Chariot too. What do you think? And he said, oh, that would be great. We love that and all. And he said, but I guess we better ask Charlotte. And so he held the phone, and I heard him holler in the back of the house. He said, Charlotte, the boy says he wants to name the airplane Charlotte's Chariot too. What do you think? And I hear this kind of gruff voice come from the back of the house. She says, tell him it's going to cost him. We got the airplane in December of '09, and we immediately flew it to the paint shop. Actually, I didn't want anybody to see it with the old paint job on it. I wanted it to be known one way. I didn't even take any pictures of it. I don't have any pictures of the way it looked when we originally bought it. It had a great paint job on it, but it didn't have Kerry's paint job on it. And so we took it to the paint shop, and then at the end of January in 2010, we got it out of the paint shop, and we put together a celebration over at Hawkins Field in Jackson. And there were probably 300 people there. It was just bitterly cold that day, and Charlotte was there. And I was able to fly the airplane in. So it was the first time Charlotte had ever seen it, and first time Kerry had seen it in 70 years. So it was a very special day. The most special thing about the whole airplane is having the two of them around, and especially you know, Kerry and I have we've taken it around to local airports and all the different groups, and I'll fly it in, and we'll sit around, and he'll talk about the original one and flying it, and I'll talk about flying the modern one today. And it's just been quite a thrill being able to do it. It wouldn't be the same thing. You know, I know a lot of people that own them, and most of them do a bunch of research if they're going to repaint it, and they find some big ace, some famous somebody in the war, and that's who they painted after. Carey was not an ace. Carey actually had 2.5 kills. To his credit, they're painted on the side of the airplane. To be an ace, you had to have 5 kills. Mm-hmm. So he's about to be 93 years old, and to this day, all of his buddies call him half ace.
So that they got to name their own planes?
Yes. Actually, the way it worked was the crew chief was actually signed for the aircraft. The aircraft belonged to the crew chief, and he loaned it to the pilot every day to take it flying. So crew chief took care of it. The crew chief did the artwork on it and all of that. All the pilot did was just fly the thing and get all the glory.
Yeah.
But generally the pilot was the one that named it. Some of them didn't like their name. Some of them got named by others. But most of the time the pilot chose the name, and so he named it after Charlotte. One other story I want to tell about Carey. He was a instructor pilot over in Meridian at a recon school where they flew a whole bunch of different aircraft. And the best pilots had to stay in the States because they needed them to train the other pilots. And it made most of them very angry, as it did Carey, because they wanted to be in the fight. They didn't want to be over here having to teach, but that's what they had to do with the best pilot. So he was over here teaching, but he finally got into combat, but it was real late in December of '44. The war was almost over. But anyway, Carey had a little issue going on at the recon school because Meridian Air Base was here, the training area was right here, and right in the middle between the two was a bomb-making factory where Charlotte was a supervisor. So every day while returning to base from the training area, Carey thought it was necessary to peel some metal off the top of the building, buzzing right over the top of the factory at about 350 miles an hour, shaking the whole place. Oh. And Charlotte would just look up and say, "That's my Carey. I love you too, baby." But the management
weren't amused by it.
Didn't have such a sense of humor, so they contacted the base and reported it, and so they figured out who it was, and Carey got court-martialed. Now, the Air Force was in a bit of a quandary because that's what they were teaching them to do. But they couldn't have them wandering all over America terrorizing Americans, so they court-martialed him. And so in a court-martial, he gets defended by a lawyer, but instead of he didn't take this very seriously, so instead of getting a lawyer to defend him, he got his favorite pilot buddy that he flew with to defend him. His name was Rush Limbaugh Jr., and it was Rush's father. And Rush defended him, and he got busted. And so he described it. He said Rush was a great pilot, but he was a terrible lawyer. And the Air Force wasn't all that mad at him. I think they took like 1 week's pay and told him not to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. So, but they had to do something to him. Yeah. So.
And then he quit doing that, or did he go right back to it?
I think he quit doing that after that. They weren't going to be so lenient the second time around.
Right.
But we've got, one of the things that we've got all of Carey's stuff. We've got his original flight jacket, his flight jacket when he joined the 354th with the unit patch on it and all. We've got the letter, the logbook entry, where Rush Limbaugh signed him off on about 20 different aircraft. We got a lot of pictures of he and Charlotte when he was married. And the day that he shot down all 2.5 in about 15 minutes. And he never saw another airplane after that. But the thing that he was most famous for was the middle one. He's got half a credit. Well, there are lots of ways you can get half a credit. You and a buddy can participate together. Or what happens in the Mustang when you pulled the trigger, you fired off 6 .50 caliber machine guns and a camera. And you had to have positive proof that the airplane was destroyed. So if you shot at it for a little while and then you left, and that's what happened was they were flying over an overcast, and Carey looked down and saw 4 German FW-190s flying line abreast. And he said, Andy was wingman. He said, Andy, 4 FW-190s. And Andy just peeled off and went down after him. And Carrie's going, oh, I don't know about all this, but I got to follow my wingman. So he went down. And he said when he got below the clouds, he noticed that it wasn't 4, but it was 8. And then he noticed in front of them was another row of 8 and another row of 8 and another row of 8. He said all the way to the horizon, they were 8 lying abreast as far as he could see. So he said, on a whim, I thought I better look behind me. And he looked back here, and as far as he could see this way, it was 8 lying abreast. The history books say it was 90. He said, I'm not sure it was 90, but it was a lot of airplanes. And so there the two of them are right in the middle of 90 enemy aircraft. And they shot down, they ended up shooting down 2 or 3. And he had to get off of his pretty quick because by that time airplanes were just going everywhere. So he knocked some pieces off and there was steam coming out of it. So they're pretty sure the airplane went down and was destroyed, but no proof because they got out of there too fast. So there was enough damage to it that they gave him half credit for heavily damaging the aircraft. And they got out of there real quickly. And later they found out that the 90 aircraft were going to attack Patton's army. And they called in that there were all these aircraft out there. So another couple of times they were attacked en route. And so by the time they got to Patton, it was a much less of a force than it would have been. So Patton was heard to declare that they should give those 2 boys the Medal of Honor. Carey didn't get the Medal of Honor, but he did get the Silver Star for that day. So we've got his citation for that day. And on the citation it says that they attacked 90 aircraft.
Wow. That's a great story.
It is. There's so many great stories. What I realized when I was interviewing these guys was we had over 16 million people in uniform during the war, and every one of them saw a different war. The pilots up front looking this way, the tail gunners in the back looking where they had just come from, the ball turret gunners down below looking down, the infantrymen's on the ground looking up going, man, I'm glad I'm not up in that thing. But everybody saw a different war, and everybody saw something that nobody else saw. And so when I was interviewing a lot of them, that's the main thing. I was digging for that one nugget that, what did you see that nobody else saw? And I want to give you a couple of examples that you can't read about in the history books. Young American 19 and 20-year-olds liked ice in their whiskey drinks. We still do. In the 1940s, it was difficult to get ice for your whiskey drinks. When they came back from a mission, they had been getting shot at from airplanes, from the ground, from everywhere. They wanted a stiff whiskey drink with some ice in it. How did they get ice? Every day, they dispatched an extra B-17 with water trays on board, and they flew up to 30,000 feet and circled until
it froze,
put it in ice chest, and brought it back down.
Wow.
They will figure out a way. It's probably the world's most expensive ice.
So.
But they had plenty of ice. And, I sit down with these guys, and so many of them tell me, guys and girls tell me, oh, my story's boring. There's nothing there. And I said, well, just start talking. And they're all just incredible. Bill Curtis was in the Coast Guard, and he was at D-Day. He's from here in town, and I said, at D-Day, the Coast Guard, what were you doing at D-Day? And he said, I don't know, they told me to go. He was 19 years old. He shows up in England on June the 4th, 1944, 2 days before D-Day. And he said they walked in a bar the night they got there, and some crusty old Army sergeant hollers from across the bar. He said, well, the Coast Guard's here. The siege is on. And they kind of saddled over there to him, and they said, what are you talking about? He said, we never attack anybody until the Coast Guard shows up. 2 days later was D-Day. He was working on a supply ship, supplying rockets to all the big battleships that were shooting rockets on board. He saved 2 guys that day that had been blown off in the water. And a couple of days after we had landed and the hostilities were pretty much over on the beach, he was in a 110-foot Coast Guard vessel, and they were up on shore, and it was either an admiral, I think it was an Army general, told them, he said, guys, what I need y'all to do, there was a little river right beside Normandy, and he said, I need y'all to run this boat up that river as fast as you can. Find a wide spot in there and turn it around and come back out as fast as you can. And like 19 and 20, they said, really? Yeah, we're in. So they took it and just plowed up there. He said it was sucking all the water out of this little river. He said it's barely big enough for the boat, throwing it all up on the shore, and they were just hooping and hollering and having the best time of their life. They got up there and found a wide spot, turned around and came back. And they said, okay, General, now what? And he said, well, at least now we know there aren't any mines in the river.
Oh, my goodness.
It was a truly incredible time.
Wow.
And, the only way that we can preserve all of that is to talk to these guys. I'm real sorry that we didn't do it a lot earlier.
Yeah.
15 years ago, I interviewed a lot of these guys, and working with the World War II Museum, they've come back and re-interviewed a lot of them recently, and it's not the same interview. There's a lot of memory loss between 80 and 90.
Right.
And there were a lot of organizations that did do a lot early on. The World War II Museum in New Orleans is probably the last one that's trying to get the last of the interviews. And Tommy Lofton, who is from here in Vicksburg, is one of the main historians down there at the World War II Museum. And he called me yesterday and was telling me about some of the incredible interviews he was doing. Last week he interviewed a lady that was in Hiroshima when the bomb went off. She was in town.
Wow.
At ground zero when the bomb went off. The stories that he hears and he's putting down on tape, thank goodness, are just incredible. And they are a national treasure. They really are. And they're leaving us at a very fast rate.
Yeah.
So I'm very proud of what we've got over there, and we've got some very historically significant. One other piece of paperwork we've got over there. Howard Richardson flew B-17s in the war, flew 35 missions, stayed in the military for 35 years, 30 years, retired with the rank of colonel. What he's most famous for is he lost the third atomic bomb during the Cold War. We've lost 12 that we have not recovered. We don't know where they are around the world, and he lost the third one. It's known as the Savannah bomb. The History Channel has done some things on it and all, but we've got the hand receipt in the hangar there.
Wow.
It says about 3/4 of the way down, it says tear along this line and return to the aircraft commander when he turns the bomb back in, and he never did. So he is still hand receipted for a Mark 15 nuclear weapon, and we've got the hand receipt over there to prove it. He never turned it back in.
Okay, you've got the air show coming up on the 17th and 18th.
We do, and it really is the greatest little air show in the world. It has to be, because the poster says it's
That's
the greatest
right.
little air
Absolutely.
show in the world. But the reason that it says that is it really, really is. And there are a couple of reasons for that. We've got the Airshell Aerobatic Team is the highlight of the show.
And that'll be Friday evening, the 17th.
We have a twilight show Friday evening.
Right.
The
Gates
17th.
open at 5.
Gates open at something like that,
Yeah.
4:30 or 5. 4:30.
Right.
Gates open at 4:30.
$10 per person, $20 per car.
per carload. And
That's going to be a great show. People don't want to miss that.
well, if you've never seen a twilight air show, it's very, very special.
Bring your kids. It's all family friendly. We'll be sitting out there watching all this. Across the river, Vicksburg Tallulah Regional Airport.
In Mound. And then Saturday is the main show. And we've got the Airshell Aerobatic Team going to be there. They're celebrating their 30th year in business doing this. And they fly World War II T-6s, just like the one we've got. And they do everything that the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels do, but they never leave show center. They're not going 400 miles an hour, so they're always right there in front of you. Lots of noise, lots of smoke, and it's a great show. I was talking to Steve Gustafson, who's been he's the only one that's been with the team the whole time, 30 years. And he said, the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels, they're only together for 2 or 3 years, and they're always swapping some of them out. And these guys have been together for 30 years. And this year, they're also being inducted into the Air Show Hall of Fame. But they live right here, so we've got them coming, and because of them, we're able to get some of the best acts in the country that come here really to hang out and to fly with them. And this year we've got a 4-engine bomber going to be there also. We've got a B-24 bomber coming in. And you can buy a ride on it. We've got it on our Facebook. The website you need to go to buy a ride on that. It's cheaper if you buy it on the website beforehand, but they will be selling rides in the B-24. And they will be flying in the air show also. And, you know, there's a certain segment of the population that argues that these old historical significant airplanes should not be flown anymore. They should be put away in a museum somewhere. And I see both sides of the argument. Down in New Orleans, the World War II Museum has a B-17, a B-25, an SBD, a TBM, a Corsair, and a Mustang hanging from the ceiling in one room. The B-17 is the biggest airplane ever hung from the ceiling. It's 90 feet off the floor. And for those people that are not going to get out to an airport somewhere, I think it is very important to have the historically significant aircraft where you can get up close and personal to see them. But there's nothing like seeing and hearing and smelling,
watching it,
to get a feel for what it was really like.
Okay, so the air show is October the 17th and 18th. We want people to come out. It'll be great, cheap entertainment, and your kids may actually learn a little bit of history. And this is all to support the Warrior Bonfire Project. We've already interviewed Chester Masterson, the executive director of that program, and we've actually already run that interview. So people can refer back to that. It's a great program that I know started through the Southern Heritage Air Foundation. Anything I didn't ask you want to be sure and tell people?
Come out to the greatest little air show in the world. We hold it every 2 years. And I go to a lot of air shows. And it really is. The FAA allows you to be 500 feet from the show line. And just because of the layout, most big airports, you're 1,000 to 1,500 feet away. Our runway edge is exactly 500 feet from the ramp, so you cannot ever get any closer to the action. You've got the best performers in the country, so it is truly the greatest little air show.
It's going to be great. We're supposed to have really nice weather next week.
And you don't want to miss it. The 10-day forecast just came out, and the weather gods are smiling on us.
It's looking good.
10 days out anyway, highs in the 80s, low 80s, and lows in the mid-50s.
It's going to be perfect. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it, and I'll be there. I'm volunteering at the front gate. I'll be collecting money for y'all.
Great.
So.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.